Hello there, little masters, and welcome to the Prancing Pony podcast, where tonight, well, Shawn and I are going to spend the 17 years between chapters with some very special guests.
It makes it sound like it's going to be a very long night.
For some of us, it will.
We'll open the door to the common room here in just a moment, folks. But first, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who still hasn't been called a nuisance or a disturber of the peace, Alan Sisto.
Well, there is this thing that happened in Oxford.
I don't want to know. What happens in Oxford stays in Oxford, right?
Probably not, but we'll keep it that way for now. Folks, tonight we are proud to once again welcome several of our patrons to our old inn, a meeting place for the idle, talkative, and inquisitive for some unscripted Q&A. We've got about 6 guests with us tonight. Maybe more will come on as we go. I'm not sure. We've asked them to come with some of their very best questions. We've got no idea what they're going to ask us, so Shawn and I are going to try to answer questions on the fly as best we can in our 4th quarterly Questions After Nightfall episode.
And I can't believe we've been doing this for almost a year now.
I know. Just crazy.
Pretty amazing. So, folks, once again, tonight, our guests are going to be like old Harry Goatleaf, the gatekeeper in Bree. It's their business to ask questions after Nightfall, and it's our business to answer them.
Correctly, if at all possible. But I will admit
let's not set the bar too high.
Well, right, yeah, let's make this possible. I do admit the results are often more entertaining when we're wrong, but we'll try to do them right. Now, for folks out there listening, as with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from any possible edits for nervous coughs or time spent flipping through pages while we look for an answer, we intend to present this as it was recorded live, so everything you hear in this show will have been recorded during this session.
And if it sounds like a lot of fun, which it is, and you'd like to get in on the next one, go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod. We'll be doing Questions After Nightfall episodes about every 3 months, and we'll be inviting patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium tier and higher to join us.
It's just one of the ways we're saying thank you to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to stump us, humiliate us, make us laugh, or just get to know us a little bit better.
That's right. But before we get into that, we actually have a few, I hate this word, but corrections to make.
Addendums.
Addenda. Core agenda.
Or agenda, yeah.
We always seem to make at least one big mistake every few months, don't we? That somebody calls us out on. It turned out we had 3 errors in one episode recently.
That's a record.
That is a record, and let's hope it stays a record. This
Seriously.
is episode 95. 3 little factual errors here. So why don't we get through these quickly and then forget this ever happened?
I think that's a good idea.
We were talking about the use of the word potatoes versus taters. As we were talking about, the gaffer being an expert on potatoes. And I said that Sam Gamgee never says the word potatoes in the book. I said he always calls them taters, despite what I called the famous film line about potatoes. Well, listener Maria in Serbia was the first, but I am sorry to say not the last, to remind me that far from the last. I think we're up to 5 or 6 now.
Yep.
To remind me that Sam actually does say potatoes when talking to Gollum in that exact same scene in the book. It's book 4, chapter 4 of Lord of the Rings, and he says, "Potatoes, the gaffer's delight, and rare good ballast for an empty belly."
And, that's what we get for word searching in our ebooks for potatoes, Potatoes, forgetting that Tolkien had hyphenated the syllables to emphasize Sam's diction.
Oops.
So we were both responsible.
Classic blunder.
Classic blunder. Right behind never get involved in the land war in Asia. Is don't forget about hyphenization.
That's right.
We are both responsible for that one. Neither of us caught the error. So thanks to all of you and the growing number of you who did.
Who continue to let us know about it.
Seriously. For the rest of our lives, Shawn.
Yes. Also in that same episode, and this one is all on me, Alan, when talking about Bilbo arriving at Lake Town on his birthday back in The Hobbit, you asked if he was 50 turning 51, and I said very confidently, no, he was 51 turning 52. And
it was your confidence that made me assume you were absolutely right.
That it's all smoke and mirrors, my friend. That's how I get through life.
But
no, I was actually thinking of him saying in Lord of the Rings, he actually says, I was only 51 then. But of course that meant that he was turning 51 on that birthday. And really all I had to do was look at the timeline and remember that his adventure in The Hobbit was in 2941 of the Third Age. And then of course his 111th birthday is in 3001, 60 years later. Pretty simple math there.
Yeah.
So he was turning 51. But I didn't look at the timeline because I was just speaking off the cuff.
Well, that's what you get for speaking off the cuff, which is, of course, what we're doing all night tonight.
That's true. That's true. So it's bound to be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
So one more mistake that I made.
I dodged a bullet on this one.
Sometimes I wonder why I'm still around. This one isn't entirely definitive, but it's open enough to interpretation that I think it deserves pointing out.
Yeah.
I said that the 3 Hobbit families of Bagshot Row were the Bagginses, the Gamgees, and the Two-Foots. Now, I came to that conclusion because Bagshot Row is described as just below Bag End, which I thought meant just down the street from Bag End. In some parts of the country, I've heard people say this in New York, and I know people say this in my hometown of New Orleans. People will say, they'll say a particular side of a street or a landmark is above that street or landmark, and another side is below that street or landmark. So
Usually
that's kind of what I was
north or south, right?
North or south, or actually east or west is what I'm thinking of in New Orleans. In the particular instance I'm thinking of. But yeah, so I figured below Bag End must mean, just down the street, just a particular side of Bag End. So I'm thinking Gaffer lives in number 3, Bag End must be number 1 because it's at the end, and the Two-Foot house is number 2. That was my thought, at least.
Yeah. Well, once again, it was Maria in Serbia who put us straight on this. She pointed out that in the nomenclature of the Lord of the Rings, we learned that Bagshot Row was a row of small holes in the lane below Bag End, said to have been so named because the earth removed in excavating Bag End was shot over the edge of the sudden fall in the hillside on the ground, which later became the gardens and earth walls of the humbler dwelling. So clearly, Bagshot Row is below Bag End in a literal sense. It's at the bottom of the hill, or the next part of the hill below Bag End.
Yeah, and Maria even directed us to one of Tolkien's own illustrations, the one called The Hill, Hobbiton Across the Water, where you can clearly see Bag End at the top of the hill and 3 holes at the bottom of the hill. I even went back and did a reread of the chapter, and I gained a new understanding of the passage about how the 3 Hobbit families of Bagshot Row, and I'll skip ahead a little bit here, were intensely interested and especially envied for being so close to the party planning. And I realized that was really describing people adjacent to the party planning, not involved in the party planning. So that, combined with the illustration, made me realize that even though it's not 100% definitive, I'm pretty sure I was wrong there. I think the 3 families of Bagshot Row, which is a separate place from Bag End, must be the Gamgees, the Two-Foots, and some unnamed third who we have no idea who it is.
Some very lucky family.
Yeah.
But really, that does make a lot more sense. When we know that Bagshot Row is an area of poorer homes. I mean, these are working class hobbits. It doesn't seem to fit that Bag End, this most luxurious hobbit hole, would be right on the same street.
Yeah, that's true. So there you go, folks. We do a lot of research for these episodes, but sometimes we miss things, and sometimes our conversations just go off in unexpected directions, and we haven't fact-checked ourselves. So I have learned my lesson, and I will go do my penance with 3 days in the Chamber of Unchecked Facts.
Well, what Shawn's not telling you is that the Chamber of Unchecked Facts is, in fact, a luxurious room equipped with big screen TVs, plenty of beer, and quite possibly a masseuse. But he won't go there yet because we've got an episode to record.
7 days. I'll take 7 days there. Thank you.
Don't throw me in the briar patch. So his sentence might actually be longer after this Q&A episode. You never know. Well, we have got a bunch of wonderful guests waiting to say hello. So without further ado, why don't we introduce them? I'm going to unmute you all so that you can say hi to your fellow podcast listeners. Let them know your first name and where you're joining us from tonight.
Chad from Texas.
Very good, sir. Next up.
Mega Vanan. This is Bruce from California.
Welcome, Bruce.
Hi, Bruce.
Lee from Oregon.
Hi, Lee. Welcome back.
Welcome, Lee.
Hi, this is Sharat, no longer from Maryland, but from Edinburgh.
Oh, welcome.
That's right. I remember hearing about that. Welcome again, Sharat.
Yeah. Next up.
Emily from deep in the heart of Texas.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
Ooh.
You got to sing that if you're going to say that.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
There you go. We've got a brave listener tonight. And next up.
Hi, I'm Ed, Mind of Metal and Wheels, and my tower is in Fairfax, Virginia.
Very good place to be.
The Wizard's Vale of Fairfax.
The Wizard's Vale of Fairfax. I like that. That was good. That was a great set of introductions. Thank you all. For those of you listening, you might recognize that we have a number of new voices with us tonight. While some of these folks, Lee, Sharat, and Emily, have been with us before, Chad, Bruce, and Ed are joining us tonight for the very first time. So be sure to give them a good welcome.
A very hearty welcome to all of you.
Yes.
why don't we go ahead and let's just go ahead and jump into some questions, folks. Who wants to go first? Please raise your hand.
There we go, Sharat.
All right, Sharat.
Okay, so I know you were trying to put corrections behind you, but
Wow.
I didn't comment on Facebook because I wasn't sure this rose to the level of a correction, so I just wanted to throw it out to I guess everyone, but first of all, you and Shawn.
Why do it on Facebook when only 100 people might see it when you can do it on the podcast and 5,000 people will hear it?
I guess I miscalculated there. But the question is about the idea of where Bilbo's wealth came from. You know, you guys talked about it, and you said you didn't think there was any evidence that Bilbo owned Bagshot Row. I thought I remembered something about it, but at the end of Lord of the Rings, the published Lord of the Rings, there's the conversation with the gaffer who says, you know, you never ought to have sold Bag End, as I always said, that's what started all the mischief. And I thought that it was much stronger in the evidence that they'd been kicked off Bagshot Row because he'd sold off Bag End.
Okay.
But I think I'm remembering...
So selling Bag End... Okay.
But I think I'm remembering that maybe in one of the early versions where, in Return of the Shadow, where Bilbo's the one going off on his adventures, there might be something about the contract ending up with some of the... there wasn't enough protection for the residents of Bagshot Row, and so they got kicked off by Sackvilles.
By whoever the new...
Which would suggest that the Sackville Bagginses actually owned Bagshot Row and then evicted them all.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's certainly not an unreasonable conclusion. I'm looking at that paragraph right now in the published version.
Yep.
I don't have an ebook version of Shadow of the Past, but old Gamgee's saying basically, you never ought to have sold Bag End, as I always said. That's what started all the mischief. And then later in that paragraph, we learned that Bagshot Row has been dug up and his taters have been ruined, which is most unfortunate. Yeah, that certainly would suggest that Bagshot Row is tied up with Bag End, and that selling Bag End also transferred ownership of Bagshot Row to the Sackville Bagginses, who were then able to do what they wanted with that property and kick out the tenants. And that doesn't surprise me.
It does seem that way, and so that does kind of raise the question again of whether these two are, even if they're, well, I guess Bagshot Row is still separate from Bag End, so it still doesn't save me. But from the thing that I corrected earlier, but yeah, it does seem to suggest that maybe the Bagginses or the owner of Bag End did have some claim over Bagshot Row. That's interesting.
Yeah, good question, Schroeder. Good suggested correction. We appreciate it, and thank you for taking it easy on us. We're going to go to Lee next. Lee, I've got your hand up. What's your question for us tonight, or one of your questions tonight?
Well, just in support of Sharat's addendum, that when you look at page 69 and the quote of, it has been officially announced Sam was coming to Buckland to do for Mr. Frodo and look after his bit of garden, an arrangement that was approved by the gaffer, though it did not console him for the prospect of having Lobelia as a neighbor. Given the way experience informs writing, and when you look at the very particularness of going over the will at the end when Bilbo returns, and how particular they are about contract language, which the dwarves made fun of in The Hobbit, it makes sense that there's ownership there in terms of the land, and having her as a neighbor, just it seems to flow with that. I haven't read the History of Middle-earth stuff to see if there's a change in the earlier drafts, but I think as that one person said in their question to you guys a few episodes ago, I think he's right, and I believe it anyway. So, but just to support what he was thinking there.
Yeah, that certainly fits.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. And even though, we don't seem to be told explicitly, it certainly is strongly suggested that Bilbo, like probably many well-to-do hobbits, probably did own some land that he rented out to folks. Yeah.
Or let out. See, I was in England for a week, so it wouldn't have been rented out.
Oh, fine. You with your fancy diction.
Well,
I'm surprised you didn't come back with an English accent.
I practically did, actually. You're only not hearing it because it's been 2.5 days since I got back.
because I know when I've gone to England for, I mean, I went over there for 3 weeks and I came back, trying to speak with an English accent for probably.
I
about
came
a
back
week.
trying not to speak with one. It was very difficult. I sort of acquired one, and along with all the words, I'm queuing up for this instead of standing in line, or I'm having a think instead of considering something. It's fantastic.
Get the spanner out of the boot.
There you go. I'm going to wrap something up in aluminium foil.
There you go.
All right. Lee, thanks so much for that one. Emily, I see your hand. Let's go ahead and unmute you there. Go ahead.
Okay. I was actually thinking there might be some other women on the podcast tonight, but this will still be an interesting question. This is more of an opinion one.
Okay. Why does that worry me?
So I try to look at the world in kind of a multicultural way, just because of who I am and what I do. And that includes being sensitive to the viewpoints of the people who are not the majority.
Okay.
And so I was looking at The Lord of the Rings, looking at The Hobbit, looking at, in general, Tolkien's works, but mostly I think The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, because they tend to be the best known among people who are not fanatics.
Mm-hmm.
Like perhaps those of us here are. And the one thing I hear from people of different cultures, of less privileged groups, when they're looking at media, when they're looking at entertainment, when they're looking at literature, art, is, I don't see myself in this. And as a woman, there's not, in my initial introduction to Tolkien, there's not really a lot of me in the Tolkien books. The Hobbit has almost nobody.
Well, none. Not one.
Not
None.
one.
Yeah, not one.
And in The Lord of the Rings, they're few and far between, and the roles are
True.
are fairly secondary. We can argue that Éowyn is fairly major, but she's not one of the fellowship, right? We don't have any women in the fellowship. And I'm curious how we look at this kind of historical piece of art from the 1950s as people in the 21st century. And obviously you look at what Peter Jackson and crew did with the movies. We add women. They made the women's roles more meaty. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Like, how does the appreciation or experience of this work include or not include women? Obviously, also people of different cultures. And how does it? Do we need to look at it as something tied to a certain period of time? I don't know. It's what I would be interested in is how women relate to the emotions, to the characters, just to the whole works, being that we're not really represented. And is that a big deal? And if it is, then how do we address it as fans right now?
Oh, goodness. Well, Shawn, I don't know. Since neither of us are women, it's going to be hard for us to step into those shoes and speak as somebody who's not represented in the books. Do you want to take the first stab at this?
I would love to.
There's the passing of the buck right there.
I would love to.
Did you see what I did?
I've been spending some time with the cultural question for our next Patreon special. So I have some thoughts on it from that perspective of what I've looked into in regards to culture. Haven't really looked too much in regards to the women's experience, but certainly from the multicultural perspective, I've been doing some reading on this. Well, okay, I think in response to the question of is that a big deal, I think that's up to each reader to decide. And I think there are some people who say it's a big deal and they can't connect with the work because of it. And there are some people who who think it's kind of a deal and still manage to connect with the work. And there probably are some people who don't think it's a deal at all. I don't know. I mean, I think everybody probably approaches the work in a different way. And so I do think that it can be a big deal or it can be less of a deal, depending on the reader. Maybe that's a cop-out. I don't know. But I think that when we look at what Tolkien was doing with The Lord of the Rings, he was channeling tropes from much earlier literature in a lot of cases.
In other words, it's not just a 1950s book. It's really a book that's medieval in nature.
That's channeling a medieval ethos in a lot of ways. And so I think that's why certain of the cultural tropes are what they are, and certain of the gender roles are what they are, because he is channeling. He's channeling what medieval literature, the medieval literature that spoke to him, he's channeling that in his creation.
That's right.
I don't think that completely absolves it. But I do think that there are some ways in which he was ahead of others of his time for the 1950s. And I think that one thing that I do see with Tolkien is, I feel, approaching it as a man, and my perspective here is limited, but I do feel like, certainly when you look at something like the Silmarillion, which I know we're not really talking about, there may not be a lot of female characters, but the ones that are there are very powerful, and they're very interesting characters.
Very.
When it comes
pivotal,
central, yeah. And maybe that's because it's more of a mythological work and less of a fantastical, sort of medieval romance type work. And so maybe he felt like he could insert more female characters into that, because there tend to be, a lot of goddesses and heroines and things like that in classical mythologies.
True.
When it comes to Lord of the Rings, no, he doesn't really have a lot of them, and there's not a lot of representation there. I do still stand by the fact that Éowyn is one of the greatest characters in literature, and she's probably my favorite character in that entire book. And I know one doesn't really,
she's still not a member of the Fellowship.
No, she's still not a member of the Fellowship. But I really like her arc, and I think that it's a really good arc. I dig Éowyn more than I dig Faramir, and I like those two end up together, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer for that question, Emily. I do think that Tolkien was probably ahead of some of his contemporaries in some ways. If you look at some of the other Inklings, and I've started to research some of the other Inklings recently. I think some of the other Inklings were actually a little bit behind him on women's issues. So I do want to give Tolkien a little bit of credit for being ahead of some of his contemporaries.
Our upcoming interview with Serena Higgins about Charles Williams will have some things to say about that. Yes.
Yeah. So I think Tolkien deserves some credit for what he accomplished. Is it enough by modern standards? No, I guess not. But it is a work of an earlier time, and it's a work that's channeling an even earlier time.
And I think that's the important part. I mean, we have to look at, there's a lot of people that aren't represented in the story. I have a son who's a person of color. I have a daughter who has an intellectual disability. Neither of them are represented in the story. That's okay. I never even thought about the fact that they're not represented in the story, because it's a story that comes from a different time. This isn't a story set in now. It was inspired by these Old Norse sagas. And, Tolkien went so far as to take all the names from the Poetic Edda. When was that written? So the time frames that are represented in the stories, I think, are probably a bigger influence as to the presence of people other than, white men, elves, and dwarves. Not to downplay the significance of that. I mean, we're very thrilled when we see inclusion and representation in modern media of any kind: television commercials, movies, television shows, books, etc. I just want to make sure we don't take that notion and go too far in applying it to a story that really is set, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. That would be my thought. But I do have, Sharat wants to pipe in here. He's, of course, a lit student, so he's got a lot of experience with this particular criticism and might have something interesting to add. So, Sharat, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I've heard it a lot from people I would consider friends and who don't want to read Lord of the Rings on their on those merits. And I guess what I've come down to in my personal assessment is that on the one hand, you have to accept it as a failure of the work for modern readers. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
it is something that we won't get out of it, but
No.
Yeah.
By
Yeah.
objective standards, it lacks representation. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
but at the same time, I guess for someone who likes it, you have to accept that even works that you're in love with can be flawed. And the other bit that I think is interesting is that even in a world where we value inclusion, not all books can be all things to everyone, right? Like
That's true.
Tolkien, I think Tolkien's life circumstances is the way I think about it. You know, his mother died fairly early on, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
other than Edith and perhaps some of the female students he mentored in college, the way he seems to have set up his life, he dealt a lot largely with men, and I'm sure that some of that comes through in what he was comfortable in writing about.
I think that was very much, I think, a product of his time. I mean, in the 1940s and 50s, being an Oxford Don, he taught female students, but
he certainly would have had female peers, you know. And then when he fought in World War I, he wouldn't have had female colleagues in the trenches,
right?
You know, so yeah, his life was very much a male-dominated life, and from everything from the TCBS on forward. The women that he did know, of course, were, as we've talked about before, very highly elevated, which may not be, you know, realistic in that sense, but he certainly held them in high regard. And I think we see that mostly in the Silmarillion, though we see it to some extent with the women that we do see in Lord of the Rings. Éowyn is not so much put on a pedestal, but she's really a strong character. She's a woman you don't cross.
But although I would argue that Galadriel and Arwen are put on pedestals, really.
They are. Yeah, I was going to move to them next.
And that's really the struggle. Yeah, that's the problem there. It's tough. I mean, I don't know. You know, Emily, in your original question, you mentioned, you know, like Peter Jackson and his attempt to deal with that issue by putting more women characters in the stories. And I don't really feel like he was able to accomplish probably what he set out to do either by adding more women characters. I think it's hard to insert them because you do that and then you end up with sort of adding to Éowyn's role in Lord of the Rings movies, and so much of what they added was just her pining after Aragorn. That doesn't seem terribly empowering.
No, it doesn't.
Or Tauriel being stuck in a love triangle between Legolas and was it Keely or Feely?
Yeah, don't get me started on that. Yeah.
So I think all storytellers are probably struggling with that more than they should. And I think even modern storytellers probably need to do better about representation. But I still like to give Tolkien credit. For me, as a white male, sitting from my seat of privilege, I do think that Tolkien does deserve some credit for what he did do, and I think that his work remains a very multicultural work, believe it or not, because of his message of many people from many places coming together to fight evil. It is multicultural in that way, though it may not be multicultural in some other ways. And I think that there is a feminist bent to it with some of the characters. So, you know, I think it's up to the individual reader whether that's enough for them or not. And if somebody tells me that they can't approach the work because of that lack of representation, I understand. I hope they'll give it another chance, but I do understand when people come to it with that.
Yeah, I feel like it's their loss. They're missing out on something pretty amazing because of that. But I understand it's their right. Sharat, you had one more thing to add before we get to Emily. I want to hear her final take on that.
Of course, yeah. The thing I wanted to add is that again, as a lit student, one of the people that I engage with a lot is Shakespeare, and even though there isn't representation in the text itself, I do think that modern adaptations could go ahead and cast black actors as characters, or trans people or whatever. I think because it's a thing that happens in Shakespeare, and I think in the performances of Shakespeare that I've seen where that's happened, it's added a new dimension to the to my understanding of the work. Anyway.
Okay. All right. Okay, Emily, I think after all that, we've probably got a little bit of time to kind of hear your take on our responses and to see if you have anything else to add to that.
It actually wasn't. I appreciate your responses. I think about things like this that I love, and how it's like, okay, I love this, and yet I'm not present in here as a woman, but there are these universal truths that I resonate with that are in here. So even though I relate more to like Sam as much as I do to anybody in the Lord of the Rings. And I feel that it's an interesting conundrum. It's kind of the same as me being a performer of classical music. And the question is, okay, so does an audience need to be brought into this, even if it's something that's completely out of their experience, that's not native to them, that feels like a foreign place to go, which is, if we look at this all male cast of characters, if you're a woman and you don't see yourself in that, do we need to have some sort of context historically, literature? And it's a very interesting subject to me. And I would be very curious to hear what other female fans of the Legendarium have to say about it, maybe after the podcast goes live.
That would be great.
Yeah, I think maybe after this episode goes out, we'll get some feedback and get some thoughts on that are more directly related to your experience. So that'd be good.
Yeah, because I mean, I think I would absolutely love to hear that, because again, as a male and as a white male, I am coming at this from a perspective that is very much in the space Tolkien is coming from, and so I try to to see it from other angles, but I at a certain point I can't, and so I would love to hear others' thoughts on this. It's a good question and not one with an easy answer.
No, that's the thing. I mean, it really is a difficult topic and one capable of answers that differ from individual to individual. So we're going to go ahead and have Lee pop in another question for us here.
Hey guys, my question goes back to something Sharat asked last Questions After Nightfall around whether Gimli and Legolas's friendship and whether he got to go to Telestia and what that meant and how that could be. And it was a great conversation. We also had a lot of talk last time on allegory, and maybe I'm using the wrong literary device, I'm not sure, but could it be seen as a metaphor for his relationship with Lewis, who did not take the Catholic path when he converted to faith from atheism, even though it didn't destroy their relationship? I do believe it disappointed Tolkien. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh,
certainly,
on that.
Quite a bit.
Could it be? Is that an applicable circumstance, or am I off base?
Shawn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it could be. It really could be. I mean, I think, was it the last Questions After Nightfall that Emily, I think, asked the question about possible allegories in Beren and Luthien, and I think one of the things we did talk about was possible symbolism in Beren and Luthien. I guess is probably the better way to put it. Yeah,
because allegory, if it's not one-to-one,
would imply one-to-one across the board. Yeah, but I think we talked about the whole the release from bondage and the changing and the change of fates and things like that, and how it could potentially represent Edith's conversion to Catholicism, and Legolas and Gimli as Tollers and Jack Lewis. Interesting.
That's a fascinating thought. I mean,
it very well could be. I think that's a really cool idea. And again, if not allegorical, because there is not one-to-one across the board. It's not.
No.
Gimli is C.S. Lewis in every case.
No, we all know that Treebeard is C.S. Lewis, actually,
in terms of his voice and the way he talks, right? I mean, it's very possible that that particular friendship between Legolas and Gimli and that could have reflected Tolkien's relationship with C.S. Lewis, just the way that the four hobbits, we talk about the way the four hobbits might represent the TCBS in some ways. So I don't doubt that is a possibility, Lee.
That's an interesting question too. Really appreciate that one. Ed, you are up next.
Wow. First, let me say, it's really weird listening to you guys at real time, because I listen to all of the episodes at 2x on my on my phone.
Oh, wow. So
thank you for joining us here at the Prancing Pony podcast.
Yes, you speak a lot quicker in my head.
That's really funny.
Oh, that is funny.
We probably get to the point a lot faster. Yeah.
We probably do.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
our digressions are fast. Everything's fast.
200 hours of Alan and Shawn all shoved into 3 months. So
I am so sorry.
I know. I want to apologize.
Oh, nothing to apologize for.
And give you some sort of detox program.
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. All right. Question.
Yes.
So I was intrigued by one of your previous guests' question about Gandalf as an RPG character, and I wanted to throw
Oh, yes, that was fun.
A theory of mine about the Nazgul in RPG terms. We were talking about this, I think, Thursday night at Moot. There was a big conversation, I think, in that room where we met you and whatnot. Anyway,
yeah.
So anyway, my contention is, and no one believes me, but I'm going to let you... nobody agrees.
Poor Ed. Nobody believes
Nobody agrees, yeah. Is that the Nazgul are not particularly powerful beings. And that as RPG characters, they really only have a few powers. First, invisibility, which of course they never use. Second, they do have the power to instill fear, which is their primary weapon. But one which seems to vary in proportion to their distance from like Mordor or Sauron or something like that. And three, the power to command Sauron's forces. Sub-command, if you will.
Right.
And they have this knife infused with black magic. And that's basically it. They are, if you can withstand their fear, as both Aragorn and Gandalf can, pretty weak RPG characters. So what do you think of that idea? I'm with you. If you can withstand their fear. I mean, that's the thing. I think for most folks, when we see the men of Gondor just, wailing, and there's almost a physiological effect from the fear. And certainly, you mentioned the knife and everything. What about the black breath? That would be another power that they would possess. And that does seem to have some sort of lasting impact. All guys have that. That's all guys have black breath. That's true. Yeah. Anytime you talk to me before 8 a.m, you're going to get the black breath, no doubt. Exactly. I mean, certainly in comparison to Gandalf, much lower level, much less flexible in the way of powers. But let's not forget that the one power they have, generating fear, instilling fear, is pretty much maxed out. They may not have a lot of other arrows in their quiver, so to speak, but that particular one is a very strong, very potent one, especially against, it would seem, ordinary mortal men. The men of Gondor were beside themselves. I mean, they were losing their minds from the fear. But I just think, if that is their main power, very, very difficult to represent in a movie. Quite. Yeah. How do you represent that sort of psychological impact cinematically? Yeah.
I mean, I think all I can think of is one of those silly conversations you get into on Facebook sometimes. And I had one once where somebody was arguing whether Sauron or Voldemort was more powerful. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, Voldemort is a Nazgul, basically. He's a black magician. He's got a lot of power for a black magician, but he's still just a mortal man whose life has been extended with the use of black magic. I mean, he's a Nazgul.
Right. With a snake.
And Sauron has 9 Voldemorts in his employ, and by the way, he's a fallen angel, so there's that too.
I
don't really have an answer, Ed, but that's all I could think of. No, I think it's true. I think that... I mean, it's interesting because when you put it like that, they don't have a whole lot of powers, and by sort of modern RPG standards, they aren't really that powerful. I think it underscores the fact that Tolkien's world doesn't really have a lot of magic in it, does it? And so the little bits of magic you do get are powerful. You know, as I think you said just a minute ago, Alan, the Nazgul's fear skill is very effective against ordinary mortal men. Yeah, because they're ordinary mortal men, and ordinary mortal men cannot study magic. They can't, they can't buff themselves with spells to protect themselves against fear. They can't cast resist fear or anything like that.
They need somebody like Gandalf to have an aura of some sort of influence in a sphere or circle that would keep them from being subject to fear.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is really an answer to your question, and I think it's a great observation, and I think it just shows me how much, even though Tolkien's world inspired so much of the modern fantasy that we have, how different it is from it, and how that makes it more valuable. I think
some of that's gamification. I mean, trying to create a system that enables people to do that. Whereas other characters may have a broad base of things to choose from, the Nazgul don't. But like we've been talking about, fear is such a powerful thing that may be all they need to be very effective, even if they are relatively weak. Their capacities. Like Emily mentioned in the text, actually, she mentions in our chat box here that if you can scare the heck out of people, you can control them, and she's right. I mean, this is
incapacitate.
That's how they win.
Said, and that's exactly what we see the Nazgul do.
Yeah.
And you can probably imagine where Tolkien got some of these ideas from. The crippling fear that he must have experienced and seen others experience in the trenches. I'm sure he knew better than a lot of us the effect that fear can have on people.
Sometimes when I hear the screams of the Nazgul described in the Battle of Pelennor Fields and all of that, I can't help but think of what they would have felt like when they heard the shriek of artillery shells going overhead.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah,
an absolute. I'm just waiting for that to land and for me to die. And it's a paralyzing fear. And and it also explains why the men of Gondor who did accompany Aragorn as they neared the Black Gate, there was some real fear, and many of them wanted to leave, and Aragorn was able to give them another honorable task to perform. But that, of course, like I talked about way back in episode 3, parallels to shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorder, in terms of their inability to face that again. So,
yeah. And I go back to the idea that Tolkien's work is so much more powerful to me in many ways because there is so little magic, so little of that supernatural power in it.
Exactly.
So that when you do see it, it really stands out. And
it makes it more real, more believable, more comparable to the primary world. It makes that secondary world much easier to step into, I think.
I once read, I can't remember where I read this now, but I once read somewhere in sort of like a manual of advice for fantasy writers, because that's something I've sort of I don't know. I've sort of toyed with that idea of actually writing fantasy fiction for most of my life, although I haven't gotten.
Do you really want to publicly acknowledge that in front of 5,000 people who are now going to expect
I will
your
also
novel?
say that I've never actually gotten any off the ground. So, but no, I remember reading something a long time ago, and it said, if you have magic in your story, it has to have a price. And we kind of deal with this in video games, usually with a mana bar or an energy bubble or something like that. But you don't get that in books, and so I think where a lot of fantasy authors go wrong is by including way too much of the magic, and it just kind of cheapens it. And
it's basically free.
Yeah. And so only despite my comparison to Voldemort, I think only in Tolkien's world would you see creatures with not that much of an assortment of powers, just really good at this one particular power of fear, where you'd see them be so powerful because they are, they're up against a natural world.
Absolutely.
In the Third Age, at least. I mean, obviously, the farther back you go, the more magic and the more supernatural stuff there is.
Well, First Age, a little different story there. I mean, being able to sing a song that makes you look like a werewolf and a bat, and there's some pretty good magic going on there, and growing your hair all the way down to the tree so that you can get out of the tree house. Ed, did we do a good job on answering that? Do you have some follow-up or anything?
No, I think that's great.
Good. I just want to make sure we actually answered it to your satisfaction. I'm going to put you back on mute, and let's see. I think we have not yet heard a question from Chad, Bruce, or Sharat. If any of you three want to raise your hands, I want to hear from you. All right, Chad, what do you got for us tonight?
I'll just wait my turn. Let everyone else talk. First of all, I listened to you guys on one time.
There you go.
While I'm mowing every 2 weeks. So you got to keep on going every week. So I have 3 hours to listen to because it takes me 3 hours.
That's a big lawn, my friend. That's a big lawn.
We will keep it up
yes,
as long as we can.
Yes, it is. So what I was going to ask is if you guys have ever seen any evidence of how long it took for the ring to completely turn Smeagol into Gollum. We know that Bilbo lasted a long time because he began his possession of the ring through pity for Smeagol by not killing him. And so I've never really seen anything that gave me any kind of time period on how long it took for Smeagol's fall to be complete.
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, certainly his fall would have been quicker because the first thing he did with it was commit murder, or the first thing he did for it was commit murder. Shawn, I'm looking in the appendices. I'm looking in the Tale of Years to see if we get anything indicating when he found it and then how quickly things. So here we go. 2463.
I almost said that, man. All right. I could have sounded really smart if I'd had.
You would have. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you know, making you sound smart and having you actually be smart are two different things.
It's very much so. Yeah. Okay.
Fortunately, so 2463 is the time that Diego Lestour finds the One Ring and is murdered by Smeagol. 7 years later, 2470 is when he hides in the Misty Mountains. Given that by the time he hid there, he'd been kicked out of his family's, holes in the ground because of all of the various thieving and evil things that he was doing using the ring. Maybe it's reasonable to say that it was 7 years. By the time he hid there, he was no longer just Smeagol. He was now Smeagol Gollum. And that would suggest to me that by that point, the possession of the ring has, overtaken whatever was left of Smeagol. And that he was now fully Gollum by that point. What do you think, Shawn? Does 7 years sound about right?
I think 7 years sounds about right. To the degree to which he ever did completely fall. I do want to take exception with the idea that he did completely fall, though, because
that's true. That's a good point.
I don't think he did. I think
Smeagol was still there even at the very end.
Smeagol was still there even at the very end, and in fact, he was very close to coming back and to possibly being capable of some good again. And unfortunately, tragically, right at that moment, Sam saw him pawing at Master.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, Sam's worst moment happens right when Gollum's best moment was about to happen, and it kind of prevented who knows what might have happened in terms of Smeagol coming back and Gollum maybe turning his life around a little bit before the end. So I don't think that he ever had a complete fall. I'm sure it probably was about 7 years. I think it was very quick for him to basically become what he became. But I think that Tolkien's intention was probably that it was a spectrum of wickedness, of corruption, if you will. And I think that Gollum was probably pretty much evil within those 7 years. And then he probably the more time he spent with the ring, brooding over the ring, he just got more and more corrupted in different ways. So I don't think it ever stopped. Maybe that's another way to say that. I don't think it ever stopped.
You're right. It started off pretty strong. I mean, the fact that he had to that he killed Diego for it is indication of his the rapidity of his fall. But I think you're right. It's fair to say that the fall was not entirely complete. He was never 100% irredeemable until the very, very end when he bites the finger off and falls off the edge. Because like you said, that moment where he really was beginning to have second thoughts, that was a moment of a turning point. And unfortunately, Sam's reaction did not help.
An interesting corollary to that question would be with the Nazgul, which I think we would probably all agree that the Nazgul are probably irredeemable. It would be interesting to know how long it took for them, but of course we just don't have anything to go on.
No, that would be all speculation. Well, Chad, do you think, do we answer that to your satisfaction, or do you have a follow-up or anything you want to add?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, the time that he began hiding because of the fear. That's what I was always considering it when he got so paranoid that not that he was going to be doing bad things, but that someone else was going to do something bad to him.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That he started hiding. And so, and of course, that's the thing with the murder and how he began in the worst possible way, whereas Bilbo listened.
Bilbo did the right thing, So probably about that 7-year mark sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So, Bruce, Sherratt, do either of you have a question at this point? We want to go ahead and get you involved.
Okay, we've got Bruce.
All right, Bruce, let's go ahead and get you on there. Hey, Bruce, welcome.
Thank you very much. Truly appreciate the podcast and the opportunity to ask a question tonight. I was hoping that that at the turning of the tide between the everybody having a chance to ask a question, I'd be able to fit my one-trick pony group of questions for you.
You feel free. I mean, we're doing okay on time, and if they're not too difficult, if they're all as difficult as Emily's, man, forget it.
No, absolutely not. I sometimes feel like I'm listening to all of these extraordinary people who love, the brilliant author that Tolkien is. The doctors, Fleeger and Olson and Shippey, and some of the questions that have come up in other questions after Nightfall here. I just feel like, I'm just not a very good student, if you will. And so I'm going to ask a question that's going to bust the curve a bit and make me feel better. Right. And that is
nonsense.
And that is
we're ready for it.
All right. And now for something completely different. When did you first learn about Monty Python? The second question is, why do you think Monty Python still fascinates you? And the last question is, what is the average airspeed velocity of a decrepit old raven from the Tower of London?
Oh, man. Wow.
Good set of questions. Well, Shawn, when were you first exposed to Monty Python?
I was probably 10 or 11 years old. So it would have been...
That was younger than me.
It would have been probably 4 or 5 years before I discovered Tolkien, just for a frame of reference, because I was...
Wow.
No, I was 15 when I first read Tolkien. And
right.
Yeah, I think I was probably 10 or 11 when I first discovered Monty Python. It was on... I don't know. It was on some basic cable channel at like 11 p.m. on Sunday nights. And
what in the world were you doing up that late as a 10 or 11-year-old kid?
I was not.
You've always been a night owl?
It's true. I always have been a night owl. And it works out well for us now with the podcast scheduling.
It does, being 2 hours ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was a TV room right next to my bedroom in my parents' house that I grew up in, and I used to just sneak over to to the TV room, and I wasn't watching anything worse than Monty Python. So there's that.
Well, there is that, yeah.
But I would watch Monty Python, and I was like, I put it on, and it just blew me away. I'd never seen anything like it.
That's hilarious. I'd never even heard about Monty Python until I was in high school. And my first actual exposure was, thankfully, the Holy Grail. I think I was 16. Absolutely cracked me up. I couldn't stop laughing.
Oh, and I guess it was probably clear because I said it was a show, but it was Monty Python's Flying Circus that I first discovered.
Well, yeah, when you said show, I knew what you meant. Yeah.
That's great.
So what was, I'm trying to remember, Shawn, do you recall this? I mean, the third part was the airspeed velocity, and I'm going to have no idea, but...
I think the second question is why does Monty Python still speak to me?
That's right. And why is it so funny to so many people? My goodness.
I think I can tell you why it speaks to me is because I've just never known another comedy troupe that could be so nerdy all the time, and they've kind of they have such a range from the highbrow to the lowbrow. Very erudite comedy at times, and just ridiculously silly, slapsticky comedy at times.
There's something for everybody. You're right.
Yeah, and for me, my sense of humor ranges. It spans all of that, and so I just like all of that. And I think for me, as a kid, I first caught on to it. Some of the earliest things I can remember are things like the Hungarian sketch. The Hungarian phrase book with all the...
If I said you had the beautiful body,
would you hold it against me?
I am no longer infected.
You have beautiful thighs. Yeah, I mean, it was so ridiculous and so funny, and
man, that's great stuff.
And I just never heard anything like that comedically. And there have been, other comedy troupes that have come along since then who kind of got close, but I think Monty Python is the only one that just so consistently hit on all those levels.
Does it. Yeah, you're
and
right.
I think that's why it appeals to so many people still today. There's something about nerds just love Monty Python, don't we?
Well, I think there's a certain intelligence level required to think it's funny.
Yeah.
I think that may be part of why nerds like it so much, is because there is sort of that expectation from Python that the listeners are with it. The listeners understand. The listeners are smart and informed. I don't know. That may just be me.
You talk about needing to be educated. One of my favorite sketches of all time, behind Arthur Two Sheds Jackson, which I love for I don't know why, but is the game show with like Karl Marx and Chairman Mao and like all these. I don't think they're all communists, but there's like a whole bunch of different like political leaders that are on this game show.
I'm trying to remember that one. I don't remember that one. Sorry.
Do you remember? There's just, I don't know. It's just like it's a quiz show. It looks like it's going to be like a debate between, political thinkers.
Yeah.
And then it turns into a quiz show. And then Karl Marx is the finalist who goes to the bonus round. And then they ask him two questions that are basically fill in the blanks from lines of the Communist Manifesto, which he nails. And then they ask him a question about the FA Cup final. It just absolutely kills me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that's why it resonates with people, because I think for people of a certain level of nerdiness and a certain type of humor, I think it's just the only thing that there is like it.
I agree.
Airspeed
velocity of a decrepit raven. I don't know.
Fast enough, apparently.
Well.
Oh wait, no. Because I mean,
no.
Well, I guess it was ultimately the thrush that got the message to Bard, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Bruce,
got nothing
I
on that
think
one.
you thought we were asking an easy question, but did we answer your question to your three questions to your satisfaction?
Of course, any answer would have been fine. My only extra aside would be, I have a cousin who's a doctor in sociology, and I asked him, why do people have a tendency to seem like they like Tolkien as well as Monty Python? And, I said, is it the fact that, the people that are going to like both of those are essentially Britanniophiles anyway, that they love anything English, and thus making, Shawn's comment about nerds a little more clarity involved there. So, I and he said yes. So I thank you for taking time to muddle through the questions I had.
Oh, no problem. Our pleasure, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. One more comment on that, which is just I don't remember if this came through on the audio of our Myth Mood episode, but
that's
there's
the exact story I was thinking of.
Alan and Ed may remember this, but
Ed will remember this. Let's put it in context. Let's start with the part where not all the hands were raised, right? Because that's what makes it funny, I think.
Yeah.
At the beginning, we asked, how many of you here have listened to our show? And there were probably about 150, 200 people in the room, and maybe 30 hands went up, right, Shawn? Maybe less.
Yeah, something like that. A lot of people in the room had not heard of the Prancing Pony podcast before, which was great. We got exposure to a whole new audience from that, and it was wonderful.
And then, we complimented on their good taste. Not listening to us.
And then Alan, I can't remember what the question was, but then I don't know. Were we in the trivia segment when we were? Asking
we were
people
in the
some of our favorite things.
We were in trivia, or we were in kind of the Q&A session. I don't remember which part.
I don't remember.
At the end,
But then Alan says to a room full of Tolkien fans and medieval studies fans and fantasy fans, asks the question, has anybody here seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Yeah.
And every hand in that room went up?
Every single hand went up. Oh, it was because we were going to talk about the GPS thing, I think. Because we were doing the Swamp Castle. And how
that's right. Not
the GPS, but the Treebeard and Ungoliant.
That's right. The Swamp Castle bit. Yeah. Land? Yeah.
One day, lad.
Yeah.
All this.
That is one of my most.
Yeah.
That's one of my most treasured memories from Mythmoot, is you asking that question.
And
who here has seen
hand,
Monty Python and the Holy Grail? And every single hand goes up. I'm like, well, of course. Of course, every single hand goes up.
Why did I ask?
Yeah.
That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Great stuff.
Thank you, Bruce. It was a great question.
Oh, good stuff. Well, Chad, I think you said you've got another question or two. Chad, fire away.
All right. So another thing, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And so even back when I was a kid, and they first came out with the novelizations of the original movies, even those books there, they would speak of common speech. And I see common speech in a whole lot of fiction where they you know, even in TV shows and stuff now. So I was wondering if you guys, since y'all study that a lot, that if y'all had any ideas of how far back you see people mention the common tongue, you know, and where they just, and basically in an effort to make it easier to stop with the made up language that they have created and get back to speaking whatever language that person normally speaks, so it's easier for the audience to understand. And so that's one question. The other one was I've been thinking about the SPBMI on all the possessors of the ring.
Oh yeah,
even including Sauron and Smeagol / Gollum, and just think about the whole route that the ring took and how every bit of it from the very get-go, even when Sauron decided to make it, how it still proved an instrument of Iluvatar, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So common tongue and SPBMI as it relates to ring bearers. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on mute and we'll start tackling those.
And Alan,
those are some good ones.
I can take common speech. The earliest instance of referring to something as common speech, use of that as an actual term, goes back at least as far as Koine Greek. Koine Greek is so basically when Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East and you know got all the way to India and conquered much of the known world at the time, you know he spread Greek influence and Greek language and Greek culture across that whole area, and the dialect of Greek that was spoken was kind of a more simplified form of Greek that's called Koine, and Koine is literally Greek for common. So it was literally the common Greek, and so that was the language that, like, the New Testament was written in Koine Greek.
Koine Greek,
and much easier to read than like Attic Greek of Athens. You know, the dramatists and things like that. So, so yeah, I mean that's probably the earliest language I can think of that's actually called the common speech. And I'm sure it's got to be a concept that's older than that, but I mean it's certainly a concept that's been around ever since then, at least. I mean, you know, you had Latin being a common tongue of the Middle Ages in Western Europe, and then, you know, obviously we're in a place now where English is sort of a common tongue for for
if you're going to do business in the world, you're going to speak English.
Yeah, but in terms of somebody actually saying the common tongue, definitely Koine.
Interesting. And what about though in fictional works? I mean, is that I wonder how far back the use of that as a tool goes, because clearly that's an opportunity for the author of a book to create another language and other people speaking that other language and yet relay it to us in our own native language by calling it the common tongue.
I don't know.
I wonder.
That is a good question. The only other work that I can think of that we haven't mentioned yet that has that is, I think in Dune, Frank Herbert refers to the common tongue or the common speach. I mean, it also has a name. I think it's called Galak. But
I don't remember, but that sounds right. Yeah.
But I think it's also referred to as the common tongue. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know when that first would have appeared in fiction, but I would not be surprised if, I'm not going to say Tolkien was the first, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was, because, you know, he would have picked up on that as a philologist.
Wow.
He would have picked up on that as a historical concept.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Well, now on to SPBMI as it relates to ring bearers. Now, just a reminder for those of you who are listening in now for the first time, maybe here in season 3, or maybe you joined us in the middle of season 2. SPBMI goes all the way back to when we covered Ainulindale and the Silmarillion. It is an acronym of the phrase "shall prove but mine instrument." That's the comment that Iluvatar made when Melkor had been rebelling and coming up with his own music. And Iluvatar says that no matter what you do, you can't alter the music in my despite. And if you try, you shall prove but mine instrument. Basically meaning you're going to still accomplish my will. My plan's still going to be done, regardless of what you do, regardless of what you try. And so it's our shorthand way of referring to the sovereignty and ultimate working out of the plans of Iluvatar. So to apply SPBMI to the ring bearers, that's a really interesting concept. Shawn, I don't know that I want to go super, super deep into this, only because we'll be talking about this a lot in the coming months, won't we?
Yeah, I think we will.
I hate to use that as an out, but I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit, but
I think it's going to be one of our major themes that we're going to be exploring throughout Lord of the Rings, because we have talked about it in The Hobbit.
Yep.
And, well, we talked about it in Silmarillion, certainly, but especially as it drives events in The Hobbit, it has been sort of one of our favorite things to tackle chapter by chapter. So I do think we want to dive into it there.
But we'll try to look at, kind of a surface of it here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like every step of the way, there was some aspect of this at work. I mean, you think about the fact that Saruman was looking for the ring, and might have very well found it had Smeagol not already found it and gone hiding into the Misty Mountains. So you have that aspect. You have the notion that Bilbo found it at the right time, and that part of that was not only to get it out of Gollum's hands, but to get it into the hands of Frodo at the right time. Yeah. Absolutely. Because like Gandalf says, Bilbo was meant to find the ring, which means you were meant to have the ring, and not by its maker, I believe is the comment that Gandalf makes. So that is the strongest implication that, we're talking about a superior force, a force superior to its maker. What force is superior to Sauron? Well, he's a Maya, so the only force that's going to be more powerful is a Vala or Iluvatar himself. So, I think we have a pretty limited cast of characters to choose from. Right. That would be the overall overarching theme that we'll be looking at is SPBMI as it relates to the ring bearers. But hopefully that just as a brief overview or a brief kind of synopsis would be satisfactory.
I want to add something to that, because one of the things that I want to look at when we get there is the question of when Sam gets the ring. And does Sam get the ring at exactly the right moment? Because maybe he needs to get it away from Frodo. Because of how close they're getting to Mordor, and maybe they're at a point where, well, and I guess we do see that, don't we? Because Frodo gets captured. And
he absolutely needed to have the ring then, because if he didn't, it would have been on Frodo when he was captured by the orcs
in a very literal
sense. Tower.
In a very literal sense, he needed to have it because if Frodo had it, that there would have been disaster.
Game over. Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking of it more from a perspective of Frodo's own, fall or possibility of fall. Right. But no, there's a very literal sense in which Sam needed to have it at that moment. So I definitely think SPBMI. Yeah, I definitely think SPBMI happens throughout, and
including all the ring bearers. Yeah, absolutely. Chad, do you think we touched on that sufficiently, or do you want to go a little bit more?
No, that was great. That's my favorite thing about this whole legendarium is how any kind of act of defiance proves to be Iluvatar's instrument in the end. And I never thought of it in that manner until you guys really hit on it so heavily.
Yeah. And in Idle it really became clear that no matter how much you try, eventually even the evil acts that are done are going to be turned to accomplish the will of Iluvatar. I mean, we talked about that after the Noldor left. I mean, it's not like what Feanor did was a good thing, but it's still part of SPBMI. Iluvatar is able to say, all right, well, you killed the Tillery because, you're a jerk. Right. You burned the ships because you're an even bigger jerk. But through you, right, exactly. Where's that pinata sound, right? But through you, my plan is still going to come to fruition, despite the fact that you did these evil things. So, yeah.
And more beautiful things than at least the Valar had imagined can come to fruition through that.
That's the point. Absolutely.
That's the amazing thing about it. And I'm thinking back to, was it Manwë and Mandas who are discussing Is it right when the trees have just been destroyed, or is it right when Feanor has just left?
It's when Feanor leaves, I believe. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Manwë says something to the effect of, well, here we see how how evil can bear fruit that can actually create more beautiful things. And then Mandos says, and yet remain evil.
And yet
right?
remain evil.
Am I remembering
Absolutely.
that correctly? Yeah.
Very close
and
to
so,
it.
Yeah, and so that's such a key point. Whether I got the words right or not, I think that's such a key point, because Tolkien is able to show us how, yes, evil can create beauty in the world unintentionally, but it's still evil. So
yeah, it is. And, and that's just because Iluvatar is going to use it to the furtherance of his goals does not mean that the person who's committed the evil act escapes moral culpability for that act. And I think that's very important,
right?
To keep in mind that evil is still evil, like Mandos says.
And I found it here. Manwë says, thus even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been. And I think that's a really key phrasing. Evil yet be good to have been.
Yet be good to have been. And yet
but Mandos said,
evil.
And yet remain evil.
Yeah. Boy, that's a really hard distinction, I think, for folks to really grab onto, isn't it? The idea that evil can be good to have been. Yeah.
I've had this conversation with people who either struggle with an evil can be good to have been, or they struggle with, well, how does it remain evil then? If it was good,
right? If it's good to have been, how is that evil?
If it bears good fruit, how is that evil? And that's kind of a scary place to go, because then you're getting into the end justifies the means, which I guess is kind of a Feanorian way of thinking. But I don't know. It's a great theme, and I think we'll probably see more of it in Lord of the Rings as we get deeper to it.
I think we will. But next up, we have a new question from Sharad. Sharad, go ahead. What do you have for us?
All right. So I've been thinking about Lady Galadriel's test of the Fellowship when they enter Lothlorien.
Right.
And I was thinking it was the only instance, but then I remembered Elrond and Arwen at the end of the book. But she seems to have this power to kind of speak in their minds or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that seems to be how Elrond and Arwen talk. I think there's some description of them having spoken silently.
I believe so. That certainly wouldn't surprise me.
But those are those the only instances, and what kind of power of the elves do you think is evidenced in that ability to speak?
Well, I know it's not the only example. In fact, I'm trying to find the other one.
There's one at the end of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it right now. If
there is a scene, I can describe the scene while you're looking for exactly where it is, Alan. You're thinking of the scene where Galadriel and Gandalf and Elrond are all sitting there, and the text tells us that they're.
If you were to walk by, you wouldn't hear anything. You would have thought they were just a bunch of statues sitting around.
So Tolkien actually does tell us a little bit about this power in the weirdest place. It's in one of the linguistic journals.
Oh, okay. You go ahead and do that while I'm looking at that scene.
So there's an essay that he wrote called Osanwe Kenta, which I believe translates to, well, I've got it right here because I managed to finally get my browser to come up. It translates to Enquiry into the Communication of Thought. And it's a relatively late essay that he wrote that talks all about basically telepathy, Elvish and Ainurin telepathy. And it was only published in Vinyar Tengwar, which is one of the linguistic journals that was published by the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship, I think, is the one that's putting these out now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually the one that you can get. You can actually get a complete collection of the Vinyar Tengwar issues collected into little spiral-bound volumes.
Nice.
And I do have this, although I don't have it in front of me. But yeah, he talks about this for a good, 8 to 10 pages or so.
Wow.
And talks all about the way this telepathy, for lack of a better word, works, and the fact that it's something that the elves have, or the elves are able to develop because they kind of learned it from the Valar, if I'm remembering correctly.
From the Valar, yeah, that's exactly right.
And it's primarily only the most powerful elves who can do it, because it does require kind of overcoming the Fea's bond to the Hroa, and because of course the the Valar and the Maiar are not bound to their bodies in the same way that incarnate creatures
their bodies are like clothing, whereas the elves are actually bound to a hroa. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And elves are bound to a hroa, but some of them who are very powerful have been able to master this art of communicating with thought. And it's a great essay that talks about it talks about how telepathy works. There's a lot of cool stuff in there about the relationship between the Fëa and the hroa, which even enhances your understanding of things like Melian and how giving birth to Luthien changed her relationship with her, what started out as her raiment, and kind of bound her to that.
Yeah, it became her body, the trammels of Arda.
Yeah. And there's even some stuff in there that kind of influences how we see the Palantir and Sauron's ability to communicate, like with Pippin, and the way that he's able to sort of dominate Pippin's mind. There's a lot in that essay that
we'll have to pull some from that essay when we get to those points in the story. I agree.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I have found the exact passage in the chapter at the end of the book, Many Partings, in book 6. That's book 6, chapter 6. And after they've gotten into Eregion, this is it's Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin, and it's also Gandalf and Elrond and Celeborn and Galadriel, and I mean the whole party's there. So they were near to the gates of Moria, and they tarried there for 7 days. And here we get, often long after the hobbits were wrapped in sleep, they would sit together under the stars. And we're talking about Celeborn, Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf, recalling the ages that were gone and all their joys and labors in the world, or holding counsel concerning the days to come. If any wanderer had chanced to pass, little would he have seen or heard, and it would have seemed to him only that he saw gray figures carved in stone, memorials of forgotten things now lost in unpeopled lands. For they did not move or speak with mouth, looking from mind to mind, and only their shining eyes stirred and kindled as their thoughts went to and fro. So there's another example of that telepathic communication, if you will. So, all right. Well, let's see. Okay, it looks like Ed has one more question for us. Ed, let me go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead. What do you have?
Hey, yeah, I'd love to ask this question in Tom Shippey's voice, but I can't quite do it.
I'll try to repeat it for you if you want me to ask it of Shawn.
Exactly. So I was reading The Road to Middle-earth the other day, and Shippey criticizes the tale of Beren and Luthien for a number of flaws, he says. First, and I'm quoting him, it contains a strong element of duplication, 2 wolf fights, 3 scenes of the power of song, 3 woodland idylls, 2 pursuits and rescues by Luthien. Beren, meanwhile, is wounded 3 times and interposes himself twice between Dart and Luthien, Wolf's Teeth and Thingol, 3 times Huan speaks, etc.
Yeah.
There's too much plot, he concludes. And second, on occasion, Tolkien has to be rather brisk with his own inventions because he's put so many elements from other sources into the story, and he skips over what Shippey calls the lyric core, the songs of Finrod, Sauron, Beren, and Luthien before Morgoth and before Mandos, which he never wrote. Like those, if you were going to do the movie version, you'd have to write those, right? And that's
you'd have
really
to have
hard.
You'd have to have Luthien's song before Mandos.
So anyway, just listen to your B&L episodes a while ago, and my question basically is, what is your thoughts on these criticisms, and if you agree with them, and if you do agree with them, and I think he does have a point.
Yeah.
Why do you think the Beren and Luthien story remains the single most popular and beloved story in the Silmarillion for us, and I think for him?
Yeah, well, definitely for him. I mean, that I think his relationship with Edith is reflected in many ways in that tale, and therefore it is his favorite because of how much he deeply loved her. That's a good question. Well, Shawn,
I do want to acknowledge something that Sharat just posted in the chat, which is that back then, when Shippey first wrote The Road to Middle-earth, nobody knew that it was basically Tolkien's plot summary version that we saw in the Silmarillion. You've got that whole story condensed to 27 pages. But the Lay of Leithian is almost the entirety of the Lays of Beleriand. And obviously we've gotten, an almost 300-page volume out of it last year, I think.
That would be an interesting follow-up question to ask Dr. Shippey next time we get him on the show, wouldn't it? Hey, back in Road to Middle-earth, you had this criticism, which was totally valid, of the Silmarillion version. Now that we have access to the history of Middle-earth, the Lays of Beleriand, and we've got the volume of Beren and Luthien that was released earlier last year, do you think those criticisms are still valid? I think we need to have him back on. What do you think?
I would love to have him back on. That would be great. Oh, Ed is saying in the chat that he actually did have the history of Middle-earth when he wrote it. So
yeah, that's
so maybe
true.
not. But and there's also the fact that he has edited that book. I think the version that's out now is the second or third edition of Road to Middle-earth. So he certainly has had a chance to amend that if he changed his opinion of it.
Yeah, and it is in the new edition according to Ed. So
but I do still think that Christopher had to work with what he had, and the Lay of Leithian stops when Beren gets his hand bitten off.
Yeah,
and he kind of had
the Lay of
summarize
Leithian stops at the end of Beren's arm. Suddenly ends just like Beren's arm.
So yeah, I think so. Certainly, I think that they're probably. I think some allowance probably does need to be made for that. It does kind of get a little rushed at the end. But that doesn't change the rest of Shippey's criticism about all the repetitions. And I do remember that, right. Ed, now that you're saying it. I do remember that being one of Shippey's criticisms. It doesn't detract from it for me. No. I'm still okay with it. And to me, I feel like one of Shippey's observations about Tolkien's work, which is one of my favorite things, is this whole idea of asterisk reality. And asterisk stories and asterisk poems. And it's the idea that Tolkien is handing us a mythology that is sort of the hidden source behind all of the world mythologies that we grew up with. And although I probably said something different when we first talked about it for season 1, I actually have come to a place where I'm actually really okay with the comparisons to, some of Tolkien's sources, whether it's, Luthien growing her hair out, and escaping from the tower that way, or that's the only one I can think of right now. Like Orpheus and Eurydice with going to Mandos and bringing Beren back. I'm okay with that now, and I like the fact that there are so many of them in Beren and Luthien because I can pick up on so many of those little asterisk stories. Yeah. So I can see where Shippey is coming from, and I guess I can understand his criticism, but it doesn't take away from it for me.
Not for me. And I think I'll need to refresh my memory by actually reading that criticism again. It's been a while since I've read Road to Middle-earth. And it was just before our interview with Dr. Shippey, so I vaguely remember it, but I don't remember the specifics or kind of what his conclusion was. But, we can see those things and we can acknowledge that, the story's not as
concise, not as streamlined.
Yeah. I mean, it
because one of Shippey's big things is about all the repetition, and I guess there's some repetition, but there is this whole idea of like the rule of threes in storytelling, and so I guess that's why it doesn't really stand out that much to me.
Yeah, it doesn't bug me, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's a good question, Ed,
it is,
and I do see where Shippey's coming from, but I think Beren and Luthien works more than I think Shippey thinks it works.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say
for me.
I think we will have to ask that question the next time we have him on, is just to kind of flesh that out a little bit, since that really is, as Ed observed, one of the favorite stories in the Legendarium for so many readers, certainly in the Silmarillion, I should say, and definitely seems to be the story that most moved Tolkien himself, for like I said, for those very personal reasons.
Well, and again, I mean, he really did want to write a much fuller version in the Lay of Leithian. Really did.
You can tell that lay would have been, what is that, about the halfway point of the story?
Maybe a little over the halfway point, but not much past it.
Yeah, not much, maybe 60%. It would have been a very, very long tale.
It's hard to say because it kind of comes close to the end of the chapter in the Silmarillion, but I think it's because Christopher didn't have as much to flesh it out,
No, I think you're right. Well, I think we have time for one more quick question, and I'm trying to remember who it was that indicated they had a small follow-up. I think it was Chad, actually. So let me go ahead and Chad, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay, so all I was going to say is I was going to try to get you guys to either agree or correct me if I'm wrong. But sure. you always hear the argument over who is older out of Bombadil and Treebeard.
I think this was going to be a whole segment on the council. We're going to do the Council of Elrond and bring in some expert opinions on those two when we get to Tom. Should we tip our hand now?
I think that I have it, but I may be way off base here. So I'm just gonna see if you guys want to say
Sure.
no. You don't know what you're talking about. So, so first of all
right.
If I remember correctly, the Ents were created right around the time, like in between the elves and dwarves. First of all, is that correct? That seems like that's when that wouldn't happen, right?
Shortly after the dwarves, I think. It was after the dwarves were created. At the end of that chapter of Aule and Yavanna, which is chapter 2 of the Quenta Silmarillion, Yavanna goes to Manwë and says, hey, my husband created these dwarves, and I'm concerned that they, along with the other children, are going to run roughshod over my area of responsibility. And Manwë says, let's go ahead and create the Ents and also the eagles at that time.
Also, remember that the dwarves then got put back to sleep for a long time, and
That's true.
Right.
And we don't know.
Don't know what happens with the Ents.
That's what I was thinking.
But yeah,
they probably woke up close to around the time that the dwarves did, because they were sort of the defense against the dwarves.
Right.
Yeah. So probably close to when the dwarves awoke.
Yeah, close to the same time.
Okay.
So what do you think about Tom?
Well, that
Chad?
being said, if the Ents were created then, surely there was a tree, a non-living, just a plant kingdom tree,
a non-sentient
tree before then. And then the second half of that is that Gandalf, maybe he's wrong, maybe he's exaggerating, I don't know, but Gandalf says that Bombadil was present on Aman before the first acorn.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well,
is it a what came first, the acorn or the tree question?
The Ent
corn.
No,
which is
the acorn or the Ent? The
Tom or
Ent
Fangorn. Tom or Fangorn. I'm going to always lean towards Tom, because my personal belief is that Tom is a Maya of some sort, and if that's the case, then he is a creature of Iluvatar's thought and predates even the existence of Arda itself.
I am with you that far, Alan. I know we don't have any proof for that. I tend to think of Tom as a Maya, or as some other kind of nature spirit that we don't know about, but that would have somehow predated, would
have been with the first of the spirits that came into Arda.
Yeah, exactly. Even if he's not a Vala, well, he's not a Vala.
Even if he's not, he's not a Vala.
He's not a Vala. Even if he's not a Maya, he's some other sort of spirit that came in, I think, from outside.
Even if he's, we talked about the fact that Ungoliant, maybe she's not a Maya, she's some sort of, spirit, that's not quite a Maya level. Well, that could also explain Tom. But either way, we learned that Tom was there, before the darkness. So that means he was there very, very, very long time ago.
But and I'm also
older than Treebeard.
Yeah, so I agree. I do think that, based on our assumption that Tom is some sort of spirit, Maya level spirit, that he would be older than Treebeard. But I'm also trying to think from the perspective of who's the more reliable source, because Tom is called oldest and fatherless, Yarwine Ben-Adar.
Right.
No relation to Pat Ben-Adar.
But no, you did not. You did not just do that. Wow.
I did.
Wow, you did.
And I don't really regret it that much.
No, I guess you don't.
Only a little.
Only a
but
little.
Who is it? Who is it who calls Treebeard? Somebody calls Treebeard eldest. Isn't it like Celeborn or something?
I think so. I'm trying to remember though. We'll
Chad,
have to
do you remember who did that?
I muted him. Hold on. Let me. Chad, do you remember?
I thought that was in the same speech that Gandalf was saying that he was
eldest.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that.
Well, Tom calls himself eldest. He says, "Eldest, that's what I am." But
Celeborn calls Treebeard eldest in somewhere in Return of the King. I'm looking at my ebook, so I can't say exactly what chapter this is.
Well, Gandalf calls him the eldest and chief of the Ents and the oldest of all living things.
So that begs the. Oh, that's interesting because.
But all living things.
Oldest of all living things. So he's older than Círdan? I mean, because, we know Círdan is.
Treebeard predates the.
He's probably the oldest elf. Wow. That's surprising.
That would be very surprising.
Because, how does Iluvatar allow Yavanna's creations to awaken before his creations when he wouldn't let.
Well,
knowledge.
Do we know that Círdan is one of the original 144, or is he of the second generation? Maybe that's
something to look into.
But you're right. Celeborn also calls him eldest, and that's in chapter 6 in Many Partings. They're making
the same one that we were just looking at.
Right. Earlier in that chapter, Treebeard has that wonderful line that was given to Galadriel in the movies, where he says, "The world is changing. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth, and I smell it in the air. I do not think we shall meet again." Celeborn says, "I do not know, eldest." And then, then he says, "Not in Middle Earth, nor until the lands that lie under the wave are lifted up again."
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm going to say that Gandalf is a more reliable source than Celeborn is. Because Celeborn is not one of the original elves, so he would not know necessarily that, whether Treebeard was eldest or not. He could just be calling them that in the sense of, very, very, very old.
Right.
And not necessarily oldest of all living things. But then Gandalf does call him the oldest of all living things. Which leads me to the question, is Tom a living thing?
Well, I'm thinking living thing versus a spirit. Yeah, that almost brings us right back to Amaya, doesn't it?
Right. So regardless of, let's take Círdan out of the equation because,
sure.
Obviously, assuming Gandalf's right, Treebeard is older than Círdan. But then let's look at Tom. Yeah, Tom must be, maybe living thing means incarnate. Elves, men, dwarves, hobbits, Ents. And Tom is something different.
I think incarnate's probably our best bet. And that would certainly put Tom in the category of Amaya, who isn't incarnate,
not an incarnate,
who is just clothed. As the Maya and Valar
wearing raiment, a Maya or some other kind of spirit that we don't have a category for.
Ed's comment in the chat that when Eo was created, Tom called first and was allowed to enter before any other Maya. That's terrible. Terrible, Ed. Thank you for that one. Oh, man. Well, I think we are sadly running out of time, so we're going to go ahead and have to call it here. But it was a great discussion, everybody. We want to thank you all for joining us for Questions After Nightfall, for our 4th quarterly Questions After Nightfall. And we do hope that you all can join us again for the next one. Folks listening at home, we hope you will all join us again next week when we get back to The Lord of the Rings with Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past.
And that's one I think that we've all been waiting for, haven't we?
Yeah.
We've gotten so much mail about this one. People are really looking forward to this one, and so are we.
It's going to be fun.
We're going to be doing it in 3 parts, just like we did the first chapter, so we can give it the full Prancing Pony podcast treatment. I like that we're just doing that, manually.
Instead that's of really the cheap version of the
effect. As the show gets, as the show goes on and we get more experience, the effects get cheaper. In the meantime, though, I do just want to echo Alan's comments. Echo. Oh, brilliant! Wow, I had
to when I saw that word.
But no, I just want to say thank you to all of our patrons who could join us today, and thanks to everyone listening.
Absolutely. And as we said in the beginning of the episode, if you want to get in on the next Questions After Nightfall, please visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. When you join, you'll also get access to exclusive content like a full-length bonus episode every quarter, along with short postscripts to each chapter episode.
Now, we're a few $100s away from our next goal of setting up a Discord server, which will give our patrons a chance to listen in live during a recording. There's going to be plenty of opportunity to laugh at our slip-ups and our bad jokes, and also get a sneak peek in an upcoming episode.
Which would be pretty fun. There is another way you can help us out, though. You can check out the official library pages over at our website, prancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a couple sets of links for our listeners to all the Tolkien books we've ever mentioned on the show.
You can also give us a hand by posting a review on iTunes. This increases our visibility, which means more new listeners, more questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and just a bigger and more exciting Tolkien community.
And finally, we'd really appreciate you sharing us on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you hang out and might find Tolkien fans. Please tell them about our show. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week when Gandalf finally does something to Bilbo's ring that he should have done a long, long time ago.
Thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want everybody to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, corrections, and more. Maybe not any more corrections, hopefully.
Please no more.
And more on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at Kierdan's contribution tier, some of whom are with us tonight. DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your best questions. Don't make them too hard, though, or Shawn's going to have to just issue more directions. Please send those to us.
I'm getting good at that.
That's right. Send those to Barnum at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get them into our next show. Well, I don't know what, 95 minutes? It is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
farewell, friends.